I think I've been in church for decades, but there's something about pro-life people, and I think it's because the pro-life is the closest to the heart of God, and he just rubs off on you. I guess you all got the brochures with my daughter's picture, and I'd like to introduce you to Laura Hope Smith. She only resembles me a little bit because we adopted her when she was 4 years old. She was a joy. Laura was a product of a failed adoption. I know I'm in the right group of people where I say people dispose of children. Unfortunately, Laura was 4 years old when her adopted family, Christian family, decided to get rid of her after the mother was physically abusing her for several years. It was our joy to rescue her, and she brought so much more into our life. So much so that I really thought that God was going to use her life in a great way. I would always tell her, Laura, there's something so special about you. I know God's going to use you. Laura had a beautiful voice. I thought she was going to sing for the Lord. And she would just go, oh, Mom. But I knew there was something special about Laura, and I wish you could all meet her today. But unfortunately, I am her voice today. On September 13th, 2007, I got a phone call. We just sat down to dinner to watch the evening news. The caller ID said it was my daughter calling. We had just taken her back up to Cape Cod, where she lives, from our summer home in Jersey. I thank God she spent the summer with us. Her fiancé had just gotten shipped off to Iraq in June, and I think she was feeling sad, and she came down and spent the summer at our summer home. My husband returned her just 5 days previous to this phone call. When I answered the phone, I didn't recognize the voice because it was crying and screaming and making guttural noises, and it wasn't Laura. I did make out 4 words, though. It was Laura, emergency room, not breathing, and abortion. To hear one of those 3 words in a sentence concerning your child would send terror into the heart of a parent. To hear all 3 of them in the same sentence changed all our lives. And I calmed her down. It was a friend of her. Her name was Karen. She had taken Laura for an abortion. I had no idea Laura was pregnant. I had no idea Laura was sexually active. We talked to her whole life about remaining pure, gave her the promise ring, and somewhere along the line, I don't know what happened, but so it was a very shocking phone call to get. If it didn't come from Laura's phone call, I would have had a hard time believing it. But Karen was saying she took Laura for an abortion, and she went to pick her up. The ambulance was there bringing her to the hospital. She was at the hospital, and the doctor wanted to talk to me. Laura was dead on arrival, but they didn't tell Karen that because she wasn't kin. She gave me the phone, and the doctor got on the phone, and he started to tell me all they were doing for Laura, what they did, how they did this, and how they did that. And I wanted him to keep on talking because I was praying the whole time he was talking, and I said, God, please give her a 50-50 chance. God, I have great faith. I can handle 90-10, but God, please just give her a chance. But he broke through my prayer with what I call gentle thunder. He was so soft-spoken, and yet he said the words that crushed my heart, and he said, she's gone. Literally, the oxygen was sucked out of my room. I had a very hard time breathing. Ironically, I found out 5.5 months later that's exactly what happened to my daughter and how she died. The oxygen was sucked out of her lungs. She died the same way Michael Jackson died, from the same drug. I know him with a great group of people who understand the medical implications of that. It was propofol. He had no monitoring. He had no medical assistance, no crash cart, not even a pulse oximeter. Laura died during the procedure, and he didn't even notice. But for a man that deals in death every day, that is not surprising to me. We immediately threw clothes into a suitcase and rushed to her side. We were speeding, we were going very fast, and then I remembered what was waiting for me at the other end. I said to my husband, slow down. It was a 7-hour drive. I said, don't go so fast. I didn't want to face what I had to face. Now, I'm the oldest of a large Irish Catholic family. I'm the oldest of 9. Several of my sisters still lived in the area. They were immediately at Laura's bedside with many more nieces and nephews. But I was not to have that experience because they don't leave a body out that long. By the time I got there, she was in the morgue. I had to go down to the basement and walk through cement hallways, and they brought her out on a steel stretcher in a body bag, unzipped it in front of me so I could identify it. I still hear that zipper every time I think about that. It echoed through the halls. I started to fall backwards, and someone shoved a chair under me, and that's where I remained for the next half hour, begging her to wake up, asking her to wake up, asking God to wake her up. Nothing ever prepares you for that. They finally told me that I needed to go. I understood that. It was 3 a.m. at that time. We started planning the funeral. I was picking out her coffin and her tombstone when I should have been picking out her mother of the bride dress. Over 700 people came to her funeral. Laura was a beautiful girl, not only on the outside, but on the inside. And they came through telling me Laura brought me back to God. Laura brought me back to church. You see, my daughter was raised in a Christian home. She loved Jesus. She was pro-life. She was engaged. She was adopted. All the reasons you would think she would have made better choices. But when she found herself in the position, I have my suspicions that the fiancé may have put pressure on her. In fact, I have proof that he put pressure on her. But nonetheless, Laura made her own decisions, and that was shocking. It took 5.5 months for the autopsy to come through. The Boston Medical Examiner said it was the hardest autopsy they've ever done. I couldn't even bury my daughter after the funeral because I was warned they would try to cover up her death and not to trust the autopsy. And I had a pathologist in the wings waiting to get a second opinion if they were going to try to cover my daughter's death up. Abortion was never even on my radar screen. 10 days after Laura died, I went up to the Cape and never left. I was up there for 8 months trying to uncover what happened to my daughter. I met with the doctor 10 days after her death. I naively sent my niece there to pick up the medical records so I could read them and see what happened. Of course, they didn't give them to me, but the doctor did get my phone number, and he called me. And he said, "Mrs. Smith, I will meet with you, but don't bring your husband. And I will only meet with you in a public place." I met him in the Boston Harbor Hotel, surrounded by weddings. It was a Saturday morning, waiting for the man that killed my daughter. It was so surreal. I was waiting for a monster, but in walked this tall, thin, gentle, soft-spoken Asian man. He'd be the kind of person you would have had over for dinner if you didn't know what he did for a living. But I did know what he did for a living, and I couldn't even shake his hand. We sat down in the lobby, and he pulled out all the medical records, and he showed me a list of drugs that he gave my daughter. My daughter was a size 0. She was like a little over 100 pounds. She had never had any medical procedures. She had never had any narcotics. It looked like he gave her enough to choke a horse. Now, I knew that man killed my daughter. I knew he was responsible. Some people call it mother's intuition. Some people call it divine revelation. And I think they might be one and the same sometimes. After the doctor showed me all the records, and he said, "Mrs. Smith, I racked my brain trying to think of what I could have done differently to save your daughter, and I come up with nothing. When I found out my daughter only needed air, oxygen, that's all my daughter needed to survive." This man was Thai-born. His father was the doctor to the King of Thailand. He was a doctor, a Harvard fellow. He worked at Brigham Women's Hospital running they call it the Family Planning Center. I call it the Unplanned Family Center. For decades, he was up there until 2001 when he threatened to kill 5 of his nurses for losing paperwork. Some say he stepped down. Some say he resigned. But after he did that, he went down to Hyannis and reopened a closed abortion clinic. That abortion clinic was closed because a previous doctor, who was his student, got Parkinson's disease and could no longer do abortions. That's the kind of people that do abortions. When I met with him, after I gave him all my questions, I had a list of questions that he answered. And I told God, I said, "God, I'm done talking to this man. Is there anything you want me to say to him?" And out of my mouth came these words. I told him, "The blood of my daughter is on your hands. The blood of my grandchild is on your hands. The blood of every life you've ever taken is on your hands, and one day you will stand before the author and giver of life and answer for every life you've ever taken, unless you turn now and spend the rest of your life for life. I asked him if, on the promise of the death and life of my daughter, that he would consider stopping doing abortions. And he said, Mrs. Smith, I heard those Bible stories. I grew up around Presbyterians. I said, well, you may know the story, but you don't know the God of the story, because if you knew the God of the story, you could never do what you did. He told me he would think about ending his abortion career, and I left there with an assurance that he was going to stop. I thought that man would get a conscience. I thought that man might repent, but I knew in my heart that his abortion days were going to be over. My daughter died in September. By February, the medical board suspended his license as a danger to public safety. Because during that whole time, after Laura died, I researched the drugs he gave her. I called medical professionals. 6 weeks after Laura died, I met with the medical board investigators with a stack of research this thick, and I shoved it across the table, and I said, this man killed my daughter. They said, Mrs. Smith, no one ever does this. You made our case so easy for us. Not that they didn't do their own investigation, but I gave them timelines and information that they didn't have and might not even have been able to get. And that's how they suspended his license. So when his license was suspended, he resigned his license that day. The abortion clinic was closed that day, and I thank God it was only 5 short months after my daughter's death that abortion mill was closed, because no one else could be killed there. That's one of the good things that came out of my daughter's death. But after that happened, he went about a great cover-up. He went and brought all the machines that he needed to have. He even knocked the wall down in his office because he knew the medical board was going to come do the inspection. And I want to backtrack a little bit, but he remodeled his whole office. He bought the equipment. He wrote the procedures. He did everything he should have and didn't. And then the medical board wasn't going to take his license. I digressed a little bit there. But there was one girl. The only people in the office with the doctor was an assistant. I thought maybe this was an anesthesiologist, at least an RN, maybe an LPN. Well, I found out the only other person in that office to stay, the girl that held my daughter's hand as she died. She actually called herself the hand holder, was a high school graduate. Was a high school graduate who subbed as a receptionist and a hand holder during the abortion process, and the doctor. They were the only 2 people with my daughter that day. She, I thank God, told the truth. When she was investigated at the medical board, she gave totally different answers than the doctor did, and when they found out, that's how they found out the truth. I had gotten her phone number by an act of God, and I called her before she went to the medical board, and I said, I know you don't know me, but I'm Laura's mother. She says, I've been wanting to talk to you. I thought she would hang up on me. I thought she would get lawyered up. But I gave her all the questions that I'd asked the doctor, and I got totally different answers. And I said, would you lie for this man? And she said, no, I won't. This doctor was so evil that he told her I was suing her and that I would take her house away from her too. Of course, we all know that that's not even possible, even if I wanted to do that, which I didn't. But she was very naive with a high school education, and believing that I was suing her and taking her house away, she still would not lie for that man. And I thank God for her, and she's the one that exposed it really quickly and got things in motion. My daughter died because of the doctor's greed. There was no oxygen, no monitoring, no other medical staff. No one saw her life pass away because of the greed. I went to the district attorney's office and a civil lawyer. My civil lawyer told me I was wasting my time. He said, no one in Massachusetts, no doctor has ever been convicted of manslaughter. Yes, for doing drugs, yes, for selling drugs, but never killing a patient. And I said, well, I will be the first one then. If that's true, I will be the first one. I went to the DA or called him every other week. He wanted me to go away because the doctor lied to him. The doctor said it was an air embolism death, and that's even before the autopsy. The DA believed the doctor. But I kept going, I kept calling, and after he got the autopsy report, he started to see things my way. He was indicted for manslaughter in July of the following year. It took 3 long years to drag through the court system, and just last September of 2010, he went to jail on the 3rd anniversary of my daughter's death, September 13, 2010. And to me, that's God telling me I'm in this. When things like that happen, I believe God went before me every step of the way. Everyone, even the people that were for me, were saying, you can't do this, this won't happen, you can't get that. God opened doors, moved people out of the way, gave me the information I needed. This man went to jail. Unfortunately, he only went for 3 months. I met with the judge, which they said never happens, before the sentencing scenes. And I said, Judge, Michael Vick got 2 years for killing dogs. The man in the next county over got 2 years for killing 4 rabbits. I hope Laura's life is worth more than the dogs. And I hope Laura's life is worth more than the rabbits. Apparently not in that courthouse. He got out of jail in December. He's on a bracelet for 9 more months. But I thank God that he's out of business. After this all happened, I had to ask myself, how did something like this happen? After all, I told you about Laura being pro-life, being raised in a Christian home. I had read the Diary of Anne Frank when I was 12 years old, and it dramatically impacted my life. I could not get over man's inhumanity to man. How did that happen? It was almost in my lifetime. I was born in 51. It wasn't the Dark Ages. How could people kill other people because they were an inconvenience to them, or they didn't like them, or didn't want them? It always bothered me. Then I became a Christian when I was 20. Then I started to say, where was the church? How did they let this happen? I was very judgmental of the German Christians and European Christians. You hear about Corrie ten Boom and Schindler, but we only hear about them because they were doing what every Christian believer should have been doing and didn't. That's why they're famous, because they did the right thing. I used to pat myself on the back and I would say, if I was raised during that time, I would have been in the resistance. I would have been hiding the Jews. I patted myself on the back many times about that. I was incensed about that. After Laura died, the Lord pulled my covers. You know, when God convicts you of something, he does it very gently, but truth hits hard. And I felt the Lord say to me, you know, that were 6 million during the Holocaust. There's been 50 million dying on your watch, and you've done nothing. I was speechless. I was almost paralyzed. It was true. I knew it was true. Now, I was pro-life. I was Christian. I was very active in the church, doing all kinds of good works and doing things, but never, ever involved in pro-life. Why? Because I'll give you the reasons why. I thought it was fighting City Hall. I thought it was part of the culture. I thought it was here to stay. I used to feel sorry when I would see people picketing outside of the abortion clinic. I felt they were spitting in the wind. They were wasting their time. I said it probably made them feel better, but there was nothing you could do. Then I started to think, when did I hear about abortion in the church? Where was the message of life in the church? And I had been in many churches over the decades, not just one denomination or many different Christian churches. And I couldn't come up with one time where I heard it over the pulpit, not once. I thought if you lived your faith and you share your faith, when people come to the knowledge of God, they will not have abortions. I was shocked to find that abortions in the church, that 1 in 3 women sitting in the church have had an abortion. I thought if you raised your child in the church that they would follow after your values. I was wrong on all parts, on all 3. Now, I'm not critical of pastors because I think pastors have the hardest job out of any job there is. Pastoring is the hardest, but I feel myself first that as a church, abortion is where it is today because the church has been silent. It's not the culture, it's not the secular world. That abortion is in our world because the church has been silent from the pulpit. And that's what I feel called to do, is talk to the churches, talk to the pastors, and get people, as Margie was saying, get involved in your churches, become a point person for life in your churches. Because I'll tell you who's not silent, and Planned Parenthood. They speak in their message loud and clear. I go on their site sometimes, and it's almost pornographic, what they're telling these children. I became very good friends with a man called Royce Dunn, who does Sanctity Sunday in October. And I said, Royce, why isn't it in the church? Why aren't the pastors talking about it? And he said, I'll tell you your reasons. I'll tell you the reasons, Eileen, why the pastors are silent. We're a soul-winning church, and we're called to evangelism. Or you can substitute to feed the hungry or house the homeless. And I would say to that pastor that life is a sacred duty of every believing Christian. It's not just another item on the agenda. I love that Margie said we should do something daily or weekly to fight this fight. Other pastors say, Royce, we believe prayer is the answer to legalize abortions and evils confronting our nation. And I would like to say, Pastor, yes, we totally believe in prayer, but that's where we need to start on our needs. Then we need to get up and do something. We need to put our prayer into action. Other pastors say, Royce, we're a large church, and we already have many ministries to sustain already. Royce, we're a small church, and we can't do what the large churches do. Royce, we don't believe in mixing the gospel with politics. I would like to say, Pastor, abortion was a moral issue long before it was a political issue. Other pastors say, Royce, I do not want to further injure the women that have had an abortion in my congregation by bringing up the subject. To that pastor, I say, you're already injuring her, Pastor, by your silence. That woman needs hope. That woman needs healing. That woman needs God to touch her. And by your silence, she's not getting it. Royce, we don't participate in public demonstrations. I have to laugh at that one because when I think of my Lord and Savior, that's all he did was make trouble in public. Amen. And this is another excuse. I kind of fell in this category. Abortion, homosexuality, pornography are simply signs of the end times. You know, there's nothing we can do about it. Or Royce, our church supports a local resource center, pregnancy care center. We send a check every month. And these organizations like the National Right to Life, the Pregnancy Care Centers, the Kentucky Doctors for Life, we need your funding. They need your funding. That's the only way, but we just don't want your funding. We want your heart, we want your actions, we want your involvement. We need every believer to be involved in the life movement. Other pastors say, Royce, the aborted children will go to heaven. God's mercy provides to them. We're too busy doing other things. That's very sad. It's a very sad. I was just talking with Dr. Tom that I really think the judgment on our nation right now is because there's 50 million babies, blood crying out for justice. And I think God is hearing them. God is shaking our nation like we've never been shaken before. 50 million, I've never seen 50 million anything. It's a very large number. To get an idea of it, I went to the 2007 censuses, and I said, I wonder how many cities would have to disappear off the face of the earth to see 50 million people gone in one drop. So I started with the most populated city, New York City, and went through the higher population ones. You're going to be very surprised, as I was shocked, how many cities have to disappear for 50 million people to be gone. I'm going to do it real fast because there's a lot of them. New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Phoenix, Philadelphia, San Antonio, San Diego, Dallas, San Jose. Do you remember when the Twin Towers fell? I bet everybody knows where they were, what you were doing. It still traumatizes me today when I think of that. 3,000 people, innocent people, were killed that day, and we still remember that. Abortion takes 3,700 lives in this country every day. We have a twin tower every day in the abortion industry. Detroit, thought I was finished, didn't you? Jacksonville, Indianapolis, San Francisco, Columbus, Ohio, Austin, Texas, Fort Worth, Memphis, Charlotte, Baltimore. 70% of the people getting abortions identify with a Christian denomination. 13% are evangelicals. I would say if the Christians would just stop killing their babies, the abortion clinics would have to go out of business. El Paso, Milwaukee, Boston, Nashville, Denver, D.C., Seattle, Las Vegas, Louisville, Portland. Over 400 mothers have been reported to have died since Roe v. Wade was passed. But many more are even covered up. Many more have died than that because they're covered up, just like they tried to cover up Laura's death. I was shocked. I was warned, and I didn't believe it, that they would try to cover up my daughter's death, but they did, and I thank God that he exposed it. One of those 400 that died was a pastor's wife. They had 2 small children, and he couldn't afford a third on the salary, so he brought his wife for an abortion. She never left the abortion clinic either. Atlanta, Oklahoma City, Tucson, Albuquerque, Fresno, Long Beach, Sacramento, Mesa, Kansas City, Cleveland, Virginia Beach. 20% of the world is gone. Do you know how the Bible says that nature cries out, the very nature cries out? There's countries that there's no wives for the husbands. Omaha, Miami, Oakland, California, Tulsa, Colorado Springs, Raleigh, Honolulu. 47 cities have to disappear off the face of the earth to give us 50 million people. Who were those people? What would they have been? You know, we talk a lot about terrorism. You hear it on the news. We're worried about dirty bombs. I tell people the dirtiest of all bombs has already gone off, and we are feeling the effect of it every day, whether you know it or not. Because we have 50 million babies. That's 100 million parents. That's 200 million grandparents on both sides. The population is only 360 million in America. I don't think any of us are escaping the effect of abortion. Martin Niemöller was a German pastor during the days of during the Nazi war, and his quote was, "Christianity in Germany bears a greater responsibility before God for the Holocaust than the National Socialists, the SS, and the Gestapo combined, because they carry the name of God. They believed in God. They were not the Nazis. They are going to have a greater answer for the Holocaust." And I think we as Christians, if we don't do what needs to be done, we will have to answer for God. I'll tell you what God says in Proverbs 24:11. "Deliver those who are drawn towards death, and hold back those stumbling to slaughter. If you say, 'Surely we did not know this,' does he who not weigh the hearts consider it? He who keeps your soul, does he not know it? And will he not render to each man according to his deeds?" My girlfriend told me, she says, "You know, we can all count the seeds in an apple, but how many apples are in the seed? We just didn't lose 50 million precious souls, precious life, but their whole progeny is gone too." I'm here to tell you tonight that you all have one voice. God called me into the public scene. This is very difficult for a Christian mother who raised a wonderful Christian daughter to come around and travel and tell the story, how she died on the abortion table. I couldn't even say the words to my friends, and here I am on a national speaking circuit because this is what God would have me to do, to wake up the church, to wake up believers. I want to tell you that you are a voice in your schools, in your communities, in your workplace, especially in your churches. If your church is one of the silent churches, I thank God there are some that aren't. But I hate to tell you, the majority are. You be the point person. Go to your pastor. If your pastor won't speak about life, ask him to bring in a pro-life speaker. Ask him to do something. If he won't do anything, then you do it. Do it outside the church if you have to. But be a representative for life within your church. Because I think it's the church that is going to change the abortion issue.